On June 4th, the morning of Nathan's accident, his dad called me and told me that he had fallen off of a ladder and he had hurt his hand. So he was rushing him to the hospital.
And that morning of the accident, Nate called me out to help him get a part down off of a rack. We had an A-frame ladder, about 10 foot tall, and the rack was 12 feet, so you're kind of like this. And we had another lifting device that could raise up 12 feet. I'm on the rack, Nate's on the ladder, and together we're going to move this 300-pound manifold onto the lifting device. When it got stuck, and Nate said, "I'll unstick it." So he reached over to the forks and he pushed on them to unstick the manifold. And when he did that, it slid over the center and went down to the ground. And I fell backwards, so I didn't get to see him fall. When I got up, I looked down and Nate was laying on the floor.
I remember falling out that 10-foot ladder. When I fell, the pipe fell with me and it shattered my skull. I remember seeing my dad telling me to be still, and other than that, I don't have a whole lot of memory. This is the mold of my head, the real mold of my head. So I wasn't supposed to have any kind of chance to live at all.
This open area in this representation of Nate's skull represents a depressed area that was compressed and fractured. In other words, the trauma was directly to this area, pushed the bones in through and shattered them into several pieces. So he had what was known as a comminuted open fracture.
Dr. McNeil came out and told us that he had suffered a traumatic brain injury, that his vital signs were going down, and he didn't know if he was going to survive, but they had to get him in to have a CT right away.
One of the things that happens in traumatic brain injuries is that there's a lot of associated swelling, and this is the dangerous part of a closed head injury. There's a condition called herniation, and basically what happens is that the brain swells to the point to where it pushes on the lower portion of the brain that controls the heartbeat and breathing. This is called herniation, and it basically kills the patient because their heart stops and they stop breathing. We can actually see this sometimes in the early phases on the CAT scan. Nate's initial CAT scan showed early herniation, and based upon that, my prognosis for him was very grim.
Dr. McNeil did come out and tell us that it wasn't good. The results weren't good, and they didn't expect him to live through it, but he said he was going to see if he could get a hold of a neurosurgeon and come down. And said the only way they could probably save him at all would be to have brain surgery right away.
Another thing that we saw on the CAT scan was a phenomenon called a midline shift. And this is something that the physicians will look for on a patient that has had a traumatic brain injury. There's a line right down the middle of the brain. If that line is shifted even 1 to 2 millimeters, then that equates to doubling the mortality for the patient. We know that if a patient has a deviated or shifted midline, that they're twice as likely to die. 1 or 2 millimeters is bad. His was 1.7 centimeters or 17 millimeters. He had a massive shift. That, with the fact that he had early herniation, made me think that he was not going to survive.
The first doctor came out and told us that they had immediately put Nathan on life support. They were losing all of his vitals and they had to go into surgery. When they came out of surgery, the surgeon told us that he didn't think that he was going to be able to ever walk or talk again. The odds were not good at all.
Dr. Norville came out and told us that he did everything he could do. He said there was lots of bone fragments and he did get them all out. And he said all we can do now is wait and see what happens.
I'm a nurse at the hospital in Victoria at Citizens Medical Center. I had just started my nursing career. I'd just gotten out of school not even a month before, so I kind of tease him that he was one of my first patients, and tubes and wires and everything. We don't usually do that kind of stuff on our floors. Being in the medical field in some way or another, I thought it was just amazing how everything had progressed from when he fell. And you know, like they say, it really is a medical miracle that he's even alive and where he is today.
When I first saw Brianna was when she came to Nathan's hospital room after he got out of ICU. And she had to take the staples out of his head.
The next time I saw Nate was at his benefit, but he didn't remember me. It wasn't till later that he remembered and told his mom that I had been his nurse, that he'd remembered seeing my face.
My mom, she said, so what do you think about Brianna? And I couldn't remember, and she goes, with the dark hair. I was like, that's the one that woke me up. I think she woke me up from a coma.
God had it all planned out, even down to the person he was going to marry. She was involved in the whole thing from the very beginning. I mean, bro, how else can you explain, she's going to be his nurse on that floor on that day, and that he would remember her, of all things.
After the accident, I remember she was taking the staples out of my skull, and it was enough for me to wake up and see her and how beautiful she was.
There are 25 notes in here that he had handwritten, on each one something about me or our relationship that was significant to him. And he wanted me to open one every day for 25 days. The 25th day was our 7-month anniversary, and he made dinner for me. And as I was opening the last note, Nate was getting down on one knee, and I opened it up and it said, "I love you, will you marry me?" And he was holding out a ring, and he asked me if I would marry him. And of course I said yes.
When Brianna said yes back to me, I felt like it was magic. Only God could have done this. I was gonna leave the next week to go start a church in Florida. So if it wasn't for the accident, we probably would have never met. It was the best thing that happened to me, falling. The biggest blessing to this whole struggle is marrying Brianna. And for me, it pinpointed what I was supposed to be doing for my life. This ministry is, to me, so much bigger than what I was doing before. We've been doing disabled surf camps in the summer. We've been doing surf camps for the blind. I've been speaking at either churches or organizations, rehab hospitals, doing support groups at other hospitals. Just using the gifts that God gave me before, just in a different area, I became a patient. When I was a patient, I learned that there's a ministry in front of you all the time. Bottom line is, everybody goes through struggles and people get hurt. Everybody gets hurt in different ways, if that's not physically or mentally, emotionally. And when this happened to me with the traumatic brain injury, it didn't just affect me physically, it affected me mentally, emotionally, in every area. And so I look at that, and I remember always, before I fell, telling people that use every struggle as an opportunity to serve God and serve people. Dr. McNeil told me I wasn't supposed to walk or talk or do anything. And so I've got the biggest struggle I ever had in my life, and use that as an opportunity to serve people. And I really embraced that, and realized when I woke up that this is why God didn't take me home. And back in the water a lot, again, finally, which has been pretty huge for me.
From the moment the accident happened, God had everybody in place at the right time, had all the right doctors, at the right hospital. I mean, everything happened like it was well planned. And to see Nate be able to help people and give people hope, and let them know that there is a second chance, that's a real blessing to me.